Hey everyone, we're back with another hybrid project, this time starring the RX 480. So we just reviewed this thing, the review is already on the channel. I want to put it under water, or at least under intense air, and see if we can get it to overclock further or do something interesting anyway. So first of all, this coverage is brought to you by Origin PC and their new Origin Chronos, which is a customizable and upgradable PC now shipping with the RX 480. So our original hybrid project starred the GTX 1080. We put it with an EVGA hybrid cooler, which is one of these, and I have a box of these now from Asetek who makes them. So I decided we're gonna try and put another one of these on, but this time the RX 480. I don't think the mounting will fit. Actually, I'm positive it won't fit. But we're gonna see if we can either make it fit or use one of these. So I bought these out of pocket. This is not a sponsorship. I don't even know what these are actually. This is the Accelero Mono Plus. So this is a single fan. Basically, it mounts on top of the GPU, kind of like that, just straight on top of the GPU. So it's effectively putting a CPU cooler on a video card. It's a little insane. The one I want to try is this one, which is the Accelero Hybrid. That's for a 120mm fan. I bought these VRM copper heat sinks in case we need them, or VRAM rather, so we can put those on the memory modules if we need them, if none of this other equipment works. And then as a backup, I bought one of these Accelero twin turbos, which is just a dual blower fan. So the reason I got so many of these is because this is a new, it's got a couple of new things. First of all, the GPU itself, which is the Polaris 10 chip, does have a smaller Z height than previous AMD chips. I think it's 1.5mm now, and it used to be 1.9mm. So that difference does mean there may be some clearance issues. Also, the actual mounting is very similar to the R9 380, and also very similar to the, I think, the 370, but it's not identical. So hopefully one of these will work. If not, I also have an NZXT Kraken cooler. If I wanted to use that, that's just a, we've got the G10 and a Kraken cooler. So if I wanted to go that route, I would have to get a copper shim and put it between the cold plate and the GPU itself. So we're gonna try and avoid that. And hopefully the mounting for one of these kits will work, but first we have to disassemble the video card. So that's what we're gonna do in this part one video, is take it apart. And I've got some tools for the job here. So let's just, let's start pulling it apart and see what we got. So first off, just looking at it briefly, this has got a couple of, it looks like Allen or hex heads. So there's Allen key screws holding this cover on, and I think that's just a cover. I believe it will pull off with the rest of the shroud. I don't think we have to actually remove that cover. It's similar to the Fury X in that way. We got a couple screws on the back, which are obviously holding the shroud to the PCB, and then these screws over here are holding probably the heatsink with the cold plate on top of the GPU. That's pretty standard anyway. So first, I'm gonna try and take just the cover off and see if we can see under there. So that's a 3.5, that's too small. Doesn't look like it's quite right. No, that's too small. This is gonna be way too big. I've got these crappy tools. Some of you probably remember my terrible multi-tool that is used for travel, but we'll see. It's like a middle finger. That's too small. Obviously none of these metric ones fit. I don't know if these are imperial or if it's just a proprietary size, but it's not any metric sizes I have. So we're gonna try and work around this because I don't have imperial Allen keys that size. We're just gonna go ahead and start removing the shroud from the PCB. Oh wait, you know what I should do is, okay, so I'm actually gonna mark these because I just realized there's a lot of different screw sizes. So we're gonna do the classic quick and dirty video card blower fan. 1, 2. Okay, all right, so let's get back to pulling this thing apart. All right, so that was a lot simpler than the GTX 1080 already, but we're not really anywhere yet. So we haven't made progress yet. I can see that the PCB is coming off a bit, so that does mean that the screws we just took off were the ones securing the shroud, at least, if not the heatsink, definitely the shroud. to the PCB. So what's holding us now is it looks like the expansion slot for sure. There's some tiny screws here that I'm almost positive are holding in the blower fan to the socket, which you can actually see through this cutout. It's kind of unique. I'm not sure what the sort of acoustic and temperature properties are of having this cutout. I'm curious to find out. I'll talk to AMD about that, but these almost certainly hold that fan in. So we're left with the expansion slot, and then there's these tiny screws up here too, which look like they may just hold an embellishment plate to the base plate, but we'll find out soon, I suppose. So let's go ahead and just take this expansion slot apart. There's 2 screws here, and there's obviously going to be screws coming through the PCB once we get in there, but those are accessed from the other side. Oh, there's one more tiny one. These are all these are pretty much the same size Phillips head, but the screws themselves are different sizes, so you will want to do what we're doing and separate these, maybe draw it out on a paper first, because there's a couple different screws and you don't want to have trouble figuring out which ones go where later, because if you've ever worked with laptops, you know that there are times when it looks like one screw will fit and then you find out later that it was supposed to be a different screw and it has to all come apart again. So now we've got a lot of play developing in here. In the shroud itself, you can see there's a lot of play in there, which means that we should be pretty much ready to pull it apart, I think. This is a very flexible PCB, by the way. I don't know if you can see that. I'm not really pushing that hard. It's not a thick PCB, but this is a $240 video card, so it's not the sort of beacon of quality that you might see with a higher end product. But it does have something still holding it together. Let's see if maybe we have to take the heatsink off now. I'm going to do opposing corners here before completely removing the screw to kind of ensure that the pressure is about equal rather than just pop one off. And what is warranty void if removed? Warranty void if removed. Okay, so we won't remove it. I don't think that counts. So this is pretty good. These are spring-loaded screws, spring-tensioned screws, excuse me. So you can see that as you tighten this down, the spring will tension, and that'll help prevent the possibility of over-torquing it, which is bad, obviously. Put that there. All the screws are out of the back, and got the screws out of the expansion slot. Oh, okay, there we go. That actually scared me for a second, because if you haven't noticed, this cooler, or the cooler and the shroud, exceed the length of the PCB. You see that? And this is true with some other cards too, where the PCB is pretty short on the reference PCBs. So this is interesting for a few reasons. One is AIB partner models might build larger PCB cards and add more power phases or more power headers if they wanted an extra 8-pin or 6-pin. So that's one thing. But the interesting point here, this is so small that you could probably throw like a passive cooler on there and go with an alloy and copper passive cooling solution and have a pretty small and quiet card. So we're attached to obviously the VRM fan here, which I'll let you get a shot of that before we pull it apart. Okay, that's this is difficult to let's try this. I don't know if this is really. Okay, there we go. All right, so the fan's removed, and now we have a look at the PCB and the cooler completely separated. So obviously, let me point a few things out for you. We've got the blower fan here, 3 screws probably holding it in. These are thermal pads. They are adhesive. You will want to try and get this back on as quickly as possible if you're going to be putting it back on. These adhere to these. So these are VRAM modules. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. We have 8 gigabytes of RAM, so these are probably 1 gigabyte modules. and they are made by Samsung from the looks of it. Yeah, that's Samsung. And then the GPU itself is actually really similar to the renders that we have, so that's kind of cool. This is the GPU. This whole thing right here is underneath is the substrate, so the green is the substrate. The silicon is right there, which has the thermal paste on it, and then we've got some kind of shield right here, which probably is for strengthening for the most part. We're going to clean this off. I'll start with the heatsink here. There's a lot of compound on there, but I want to clean this off so that when we apply the new solution, oh, look at that thing move. Apply the new solution, it'll actually be properly clean and have some good contact. Oh my God, your thermal paste cleaning method is so bad. When you clean thermal paste, you should use water or a pea-sized blob. Oh wait, let me see if there's a way to pull this out. Okay, so I just figured something out while cleaning this thing. First of all, very shiny, yes. We've got a copper cold plate here surrounded by aluminum, a bit cheaper that way, and then a kind of typical, or actually even old school, almost CPU cooler style aluminum heat fins inside, which would explain some of the issues we've had with thermals in the review, because it doesn't look, there's not even heat pipe cooling in here. So very simple cooler. We're gonna go ahead and take that out just so we can get a closer look at it. So what I discovered by looking around is it looks like these hold in the plate that restricts us from removing that cooler. So I'm gonna take these tiny screws out. We're not gonna lose these. We can see what that cooler actually looks like up close and see if there's a good reason for why the thermals are so high. Guess that's still held on, I think. Oh no, wait. Aha! So there we have it. This is out. So we got all the thermal pads here. Before I lose any of these, let's just look at where these go, and then we'll look at the rest. The VRM, we've got chokes here. These are our chokes. These are our capacitors. This is our VRAM. Feels like an aluminum. That's an aluminum base plate, and then the aluminum base plate turns into these fins up here, which honestly almost feel more gimmicky than real, but I guess they do something because it's not thermally shutting down despite being pretty warm. Some more heat fins here. I don't know really, I'd love to see kind of a wind tunnel example of how this fan interacts with these fins, because I'm sure there's some dissipation going on. But as many of you know, intakes on the side, pulls air in, side, front, bottom, pushes it through the card this way. So that will go through this heat sink, and this part, I believe, goes up kind of against the fan, like that. And then this part is going to be towards the back of the card, towards the expansion slot. So that'll push air through the fins, out the expansion slot. These are not very close together, so we don't have a ton of surface area to work with here in terms of thermals. It is a cheap aluminum heatsink. This is exactly why the thermals are not great on the RX 480. If you've seen our review, it's hitting something like, we were hitting something like 56, 57 Celsius delta T with that, which is basically in the 80s absolute temperature for this ambient environment, and that is for the auto settings. That's just what AMD had it set up auto pre-configured in drivers, Radeon settings, to stick to around 80 Celsius. It can go up to 90, and we hit it in some cases. But this is exactly why the thermals are a problem. Now, in terms of overclocking, with the GPU, I was hitting 1340 megahertz. The maximum configurable setting in Radeon settings, I think, was 1350. VRAM, I was hitting 2200. I think the max configurable was 2300 megahertz. I tried 2250 and it crashed, so maybe, I don't know if that's a cooling thing or a stability thing, but if it's cooling, we can try and fix that with these things later on. These are significantly better than this thermal pad to alloy base plate setup that's on there now. But of course, it doesn't really do anything if you just sink the heat, because you got to dissipate it. So that's either going to be a blower fan or whatever cooler we end up putting on here. So this is the whole card. We've got this wrapping part of the shroud. This is on the NVIDIA cards as well, the 980 Ti and the 1080. This one's a particularly thin and cheap piece of plastic, but that's fine because all they're trying to do is put this in there like that, and all it does is direct the airflow so that all the air pretty much goes straight through the card, through the alloy fins, out the back, and cools the GPU in the process. The VRM is cooled by the thermal pads and some of the wind as well, effectively. All right, so now that we've got this shroud off, if we wanted to take this off, I'm not sure what size that is. It might be mounted from a... No? What? It doesn't screw through. So the cover, the thing that I thought was the cover, because it is a cover on the R9 Fury X, is fake. If you look at the backside, there's no mounting points. It doesn't like actually screw through with these stupid proprietary. This is why I couldn't take it off. So it may not be an Imperial driver thing. It may just be that these are cosmetic fake bolts, which are these even metal? It's magnetized pretty strongly, actually. And so unless these are like aluminum, oh well, yeah, unless they're, I don't know, titanium bolts or something, non-magnetic. I don't know if that's, I know some alloy and titanium bolts aren't magnetic, but I don't know specifically. Either way, these are fake, so it doesn't really matter what metal they're made out of, if it's any at all, or plastic even. I think it is actually plastic. So that doesn't come off. It's obviously just an aesthetics thing. These holes aren't holes, which was already apparent if you even looked at it. So it's not like it's helping with breathability or anything like that. But I am curious if we took a drill and drilled through a couple times if it would impact the thermals. I think it's like glued. This looks like it's just bezeled in. See how it's like indented? And I think this is glued to the surface of it. But if we tried to force it, I think there was like a star nut that was close, right? And that's pretty close, but I'd have to put like a rubber band in there or something to fill the rest of the area. Now, those are definitely plastic, actually. Here, look. See this? I'm scratching it with the thing, and look at that scratch I just put on the surface, if you can pick that up on the camera. That is obviously not metal, that's plastic. And I bet if I like sat here and really destroyed this shroud, this thing is either molded with the rest of the shroud or it's glued to the surface. But let's look at our phasing here. So for the VRM phasing, it looks like a 6-phase VRM, I believe. Either that or it's a 5+1, but pretty basic VRM. Not bad, I suppose, in terms of just raw phasing, but I don't really know anything about these specific components, how good they are, how cheap they are, or how expensive they are. But that is what our VRM setup is, normal capacitors. And let's clean off the GPU and look at that, and then we'll pretty much be done with this teardown. I'm not going to worry about cleaning off every single bit of thermal paste here. We just really want to see what the die looks like right now, just to see what kind of the branding is, if there is any, what the made in or diffused in sticker says, stuff like that. Now it looks like there are no words on this one. It's very simple. It's just a shiny mirrored piece of silicon, basically. Okay, so actually, the thermal pads, the big thermal pad is cooling VRM components, but it's not on top of the chokes, or the chokes and the capacitors. It's actually on top of this logic behind it, which my hands are full here, but this is where that pad goes. So that's cooling that. Got the chokes being cooled, it looks like entirely by air. So if we kind of hold this together, you'll see that this mounts about like that, more or less. And the wind comes through here. So the air comes through, blower fan spins. It'll circulate through that plastic piece that we saw get pushed through the aluminum fins over the chokes and the capacitors, and then through these fins for further dissipation. What is that on top of? That's on top of that logic back there. So that'll cool our MOSFETs, chokes, and capacitors for the VRM, and then it goes out the card. Okay, so I think that pretty much sums up the teardown of this card. Just for documenting reasons in the future, the model we have is called D009. So if future iterations of this product are made, either 4 GB models or updates to the existing 8 GB model we have, that number may change. And that is exposed already because there's no backplate on this card, so that's something you could already see. D009, you can see we've got solder points for the 6-pin power header. There are no super secret extra solder points. That would be done on a custom PCB by AIB partners if they wanted to do them. And that pretty much sums it up. So that is the AMD RX 480 torn down. And the next part of this video, we're going to try and put these on. This is going to be the interesting part. All right, so I'm not sure if any of these will work. I don't know. I don't really know what the mounting hardware is inside of these. I know these are compatible with the 380, with the 370, and some of the other hardware that's got completely different mounting types. So we will see if these fit. If they don't, I'm going to try and make them fit, whether the RX 480 likes it or not. And if you've seen our GTX 1080 hybrid video, you know that we'll make it work. All right, so thank you for watching. As always, Patreon link to the potential video if you want to help us out directly. Article link in the description below for the review of the RX 480. On the channel, we've got the review of the card, and we have a noise comparison test, which shows this VRM blower fan at various speeds. Yeah, so thanks for watching. Subscribe for the next part of this series. It'll be 2 or 3 parts. I'll see you all next time.